Okay, I'm very excited to have here on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Steve Lohr, who has been at the New York Times for over 20 years. In fact, he was part of a team that was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting, and he just came out with a neat book called Data-ism, which examines the field of data science. And I understand, and Steve, maybe you can confirm this, that there are about 4.4 zettabytes of data in the world. How you doing, Steve?
Yeah, fine, Doug, and yes, and more all the time.
Yeah, in fact, we are creating them as we speak.
Every 2 years. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess guys like us talking on, when the internet's connected, it's another few hundred megabytes. Anyway, so tell us, what is data-ism? And it's all about big data. Why is that important?
The term data-ism is a term that really kind of speaks to the world that and the promise and the peril of the ability to sense, measure, and interpret things as never before. And there are elements to this. The data is, the things from the web, smartphone, sensors, genomics, all the things we know about. But even more important is the clever software to see patterns in it and interpret it. And it comes from the artificial intelligence toolkit, and usually referred to as machine learning. And the broad drift of things in terms of decision making is that increasingly the pendulum moves toward decisions based on data and analysis, and less so relying purely on experience and intuition.
Okay, so naturally many of us use data. In fact, in the financial world, we're constantly trying to move it around and to figure out what it's really saying on the one hand. On the other hand, there's this huge concern, as you said, the pendulum swinging, that all of this data can be used for nefarious purposes. Is this something we need to be worried about?
Sure, and this is the cat and mouse game we've played and the trade-offs we've had with technology since the beginning of time, really. I mean, fire could cook your food or burn down your hut. Cars pollute the air and people die in auto accidents. But it also is the technology of individual freedom created regional and national markets, tourism, and other industries. So we will feel our way with some rules and some changes of behavior along the way. And I think with all of this, you kind of come to accommodations with the technology as opposed to solutions. And I mean, a classic recent example is when mainframe computers were introduced in the 1960s. There's a huge, and large corporations and government agencies started collecting information on consumers and citizens. There's a huge outcry about the privacy concerns. And Vance Packard, who was better known for going after the advertising industry with a book called The Hidden Persuaders, in 1964, the same year that the IBM 360 was introduced, wrote a book called The Naked Society. And talked about the prying eyes of business and government. And some laws were passed, Fair Credit Reporting Act, among others, that restricted what information could be collected and how it would be used. And
but I think we've seen it go so far. In other words, we have examples like WikiLeaks, or
sure.
in the commercial world recently was this whole Ashley Madison scandal, which we laugh at it, but this was a company. It had private information. But this is I don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands of people's lives have been ruined because of this. And it seems as though the government's not able to keep up to, even if they had legislation to protect us, would it really work?
You police this as you police any other form of crime. I mean, it's, there's laws, there's enforcement, and then there's judicial review. I mean, I think we're going to kind of go through that in this world as in others. I do think the drift is going to be, the laws we will see will be more focused on how the data is used rather than what data is collected, because the latter, the data that's collected, there's so much that's out there already that genie is kind of out of the bottle.
All right, we're speaking with Steve Lohr, who is the author of Data-ism. The subtitle is The Revolution Transforming Decision-Making, Consumer Behavior, and Almost Everything Else. So let's talk about the decision-making. There's a limit to how much data someone might need. Well, I would argue that, and I'll give you one example, which is in the financial planning world where I spend most of my time. We often do something called a Monte Carlo simulation, which is basically using a huge amount of data to try to make analysis of people's portfolios. And one of the experiments that I did, and I maybe other people have done it too, is I've tested to see what would happen if we didn't use the thousands and thousands of possible market models to come up with an answer, but instead if we used 10. Now, there was not big data, but little data. And it turned out that the answers, quite frankly, were almost the same. Is it just getting to the point where everyone thinks more is better, but it's just not really true? We're not making better decisions because more data is out there?
Yeah, and I think the most inflated thing and the most misunderstood about these things that fly under the banner of data science or big data is the big side of it. It's from the additional sort of information you pick up from data. A lot of it is because the variety is so much greater than it was in the past. I mean, you do learn things about people and their behavior by how they use the web, how where they travel in terms of their smartphones and things. But just the aggregate amount of data is I think far less important than your ability to interpret it. That said. When you look at businesses, Google, Amazon, Netflix, I mean, they are pure data science plays in every aspect of their business, whether it's search and advertising or for Google and the Nest thermostats, and even the self-driving cars. I mean, all of this is, the data is the fuel, the artificial intelligence algorithms are the engine. And that's true for all of these things, including robotics. And so recommendations on Netflix and similarly on Amazon. These are things that those do use large amounts of data. But you're absolutely right on many of, the heritage of much of this.
I think that those are the
comes from finance.
Those are the big benefits. In other words, I really like when I go to Amazon and it says we suggest you buy these books, and a lot of times they're books I'm really interested in. So that's a big benefit. On the other hand, people say, yeah, but the big data or big government or big someone knows so much about me, and I don't like that. And then there are the people, and maybe you can just comment. Do you think it's fair to say, and sometimes you hear this, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about?
Yes and no. Look, I think one of the great concerns here is we don't know, how much data is really collected and how it's used. And a kind of classic example, I think, is and I think there's no way to become a data, privacy survivalist. You're in this world, but I think you have to be careful about. Things like, and this is the one I always use, if you put your life on your credit card, for example, you don't care about your privacy. They know a lot about you and your transactions. I mean, my view is, the health club memberships on the credit card, the visits to the liquor store are in cash. Because you don't know how those purchases feed back into the offers you are shown
Sure.
For health insurance and the like. One of the things I did for this book was a company called Axiom, which is a huge data broker out of Little Rock, Arkansas. It is the largest, and they offered something where you could put in your basic information, including your Social Security number, and they would send back to you what they thought they knew about you. And for me, they thought I was single. I've been married for over 30 years. And other things. I cashed in some frequent flyer cards for Field and Stream magazine, so they thought I was a gun owner. The last time I shot a gun was in Finland with the Secretary of Commerce there, 30 years ago.
So your point is that the information just gets sort of jumbled, and
what I find is dangerous. You can just laugh at this. Big data's adult, right? But I suspect that for a man my age, being single puts you in a higher health risk than being married, for example. And
you're afraid the insurance company will just don't have to worry about that these days.
Those and inferences, and also there's so much of these little pieces of data, small signals. Thousands of them go together, and they're used in your world too. All the financial technology and new lending firms use this kind of stuff. Reading different kind of signals about people to, as they say in banking, know your customer, know them as never before. But a decision is made about you, and you don't know why.
Right,
and that's disconcerting.
It is disconcerting, and also you see, recently we had this, the terror in San Bernardino, and money was lent to these terrorists, and all of a sudden, all the banks and brokerage firms are saying, "Whoa, we have requirements for know your client and for transferring money that we're not allowed, obviously not allowed to be transferring money for terrorists. And in fact, it goes back, I'm curious to see how this unfolds. This goes back to the financial institutions who might be allowing these transactions to happen. And frankly, I think they really need to have access to data in order to protect themselves and people, because they're held responsible for money laundering, even if they have nothing to do with it other than just moving the money.
Yeah, and in this case, of course, maybe this has changed, but money laundering traditionally has been amounts of $10,000 or more, right? And this was $8,700, for example. So that's kind of tough. The other one that's been raised about this is that they should have known this woman's, she had called for Jihad in her Facebook account, right? And we did a story of this in the New York Times, saying it's so difficult to do that kind of thing. Whether you should be doing it or not is a whole other issue. Believe me, that is not hard to do by the people who are good at it, and almost instantaneously.
Well, I've seen it in all the Jason Bourne movies, so I'm pretty convinced that it's out there because it's already in Hollywood.
Things like IBM's Watson is already working on your personality traits and going through your tweets or your Facebook stuff and looking for keywords. I mean, the problem is how blunt an instrument that is, and how many false positives you get. Before you find, the person who may well have that tendency to become a terrorist in a place like San Bernardino.
So I guess that's sort of ultimately a legislative or a judicial question, which is what % of the time do we have to allow for false positives in order to protect the society? That is beyond, of course, the scope of the Goldstein on Gelt Show. Steve, we're just about out of time, but we've been talking with Steve Lohr, who is the author of Data-ism. He's a writer at the New York Times. And Steve, in the last few seconds, just tell us, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Yeah, I have a topics page on the New York Times where all my things for the Times are done, and anybody who wants to purchase the book can do it from all the usual places, Amazon, online at HarperCollins, and bookstores. Okay, so we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Steve Lohr, thanks so much for your time. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.